Victoria, I love the idea that if in a parallel universe you were in the House of Lords, you'd be Baroness Derbyshire of Derbyshire.
My mum would love that, I'll tell you.
Where would you pick?
Lancashire, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Baroness Derbyshire of Lancashire. It's
It's
a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, exactly. But the reason I brought it up is because Martin Lewis, money saving expert, he was doing Nick Robinson's podcast, Political Thinking, in this very studio a couple of days ago. It's just come out. And one of the interesting bits was he said, "Oh, I applied to be in the House of Lords, but I got rejected." And I hadn't realised it was. I knew non-political people could get into the Lords.
Yes.
I hadn't realised you could actually just fill in a form on the website and
Now,
nominate yourself.
I did know that because I've done a reference for someone recently
who
wanted to become a peer, who's a normal guy who's worked in, I'm not going to say who it is, but he's worked in the communities, and he thought, well, I want to apply. I want to be in there influencing things. So I wrote him a wonderful reference. I've yet to hear if it's successful, if he is successful.
Well, I mean, I've got the criteria here. You have to have the ability to make an effective and significant contribution, not only in your area of interest, but wider. Significant achievement within their chosen way of life. Willing to commit the time necessary with some understanding of the constitutional framework. Outstanding personal qualities, strong personal commitment to the principles in public life, and who will remain independent of a political party, and who are resident in the UK for tax purposes.
Yes,
What
obviously.
if that one's been added in the last few years? Anyway, so let's see if we maintain high standards on this episode of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
Hello, it's Victoria in the studio.
And to mark, I wouldn't say celebrate, because some people will be commiserating, 6 years since the vote to leave the EU, because it was 6 years ago today. It's Nigel Farage. Hello.
Very good to be here. And
Hi.
yeah, I don't think anyone's celebrating, really, are they? It's funny.
Not even you?
No, I think we celebrate the fact that it happened. We celebrate the fact we beat the global establishment. We celebrate the fact that after years of Westminster trying to stop it, we got there. But now there's a growing sense of frustration, I think, among Brexiteers. It's not quite how they imagined it.
What are you frustrated about in the moment?
Frustrated that the government haven't done enough. Frustrated that 5% VAT is still on fuel. I mean, that was something everybody that campaigned for Brexit in 2016 said, here's a clear win. And it's not been done. I think there are millions of businesses frustrated that we've not seen simplification. Not eradication, but simplification of business rules and regs. I think there are many in financial services tearing their hair out. That a lot of that stuff that came in the last few years that wasn't appropriate for the city at all. It hasn't been addressed. I think on the really big one, which was immigration, and like it or not, that was what put the turnout up on this day 6 years ago. And we see not just legal immigration heading to record numbers, but the illegal immigration, which, of course, for anyone that thinks we should take back control, what's happening in Dover isn't that. So there is frustration. I don't think Brexiteers feel that Brexit was a mistake, but I think increasingly what they're saying is, what the hell has Boris Johnson's government been doing?
Well, there's loads to unpack there,
really
and unpack it we will. But I just wondered, what are you going to do to try and sort of harness that feeling of job undone? Because that's almost like Brexit Party 2.0 maybe territory.
Well, I did UKIP, I did the Brexit Party. I'm not talking about coming back into frontline politics, but you know, what I'm quite good at, I still think, is I can still influence where the debate goes, particularly within the Conservative Party, particularly within backbench MPs. I'm pretty good at mobilising quite large numbers of people to stand up and say what they think. And we're approaching that time again when, yes, I'm going to have to do something. I mean, I just think that...
And which one of those many issues you just listed will you pick? Because you've probably learned it's good to pick one, isn't it?
The easy one is, I mean, here's the easy call. You know, for a country that's taken back control, a country that's become sovereign again. And that means, of course, we can do things better than being in the EU, or worse than being in the EU. It's just that we're in control. I think for a judge at 10:05 in the evening in Strasbourg, a judge whose name we still don't even know, to effectively stop a piece of government policy from taking place, namely the plane going to Rwanda, that is, for anyone that believes in sovereignty, the biggest kick in the teeth there could possibly be. So I think it is around ECHR where the next big mass mobilisation needs to come.
That's the European Court of Human Rights, which of course has nothing to do with the EU. So we need to have a sort of Brexit from that as well.
Well, you say that, but actually, I mean, as you know, because we both work there, you can walk from the European Parliament straight into the European Court of Human Rights through the same series of corridors.
Oh, no, that's just geographical proximity. I can walk into ITN down through this corridor, but it doesn't mean that I work for ITN.
No, you wouldn't get through their security door.
Can I be really specific about what that judge did? He looked at the evidence with regards to one Iraqi man, and he decided that if this man was sent to Rwanda, there was a risk of irreversible harm. I mean, you must have sympathy for that.
I don't have sympathy for foreign judges making any decisions. I want us to be sovereign. I think actually when it comes to looking after the protection of people's liberties, their rights, I think we've got a much better record than the rest of Europe or any court in Strasbourg. So no. And I also think this, I mean, look, the Human Rights Act was what Tony Blair used in 98 to bring the European Convention on Human Rights into UK law. We've seen other frustrations, you know, deporting foreign criminals, the right to life being used and abused. So no, I think this is Brexit 2.0. Actually, it is us being sovereign.
Does it need another referendum? Or can you get it?
Well, I don't know.
But the Justice Secretary, the Deputy Prime Minister, has already said we're staying in it, even as he publishes the British Bill of Rights.
Yeah, but they always say that until it becomes politically impossible. I mean, don't forget the Conservative Party were the most ardent supporters of EEC membership and indeed EU membership for a long time. I think I believe this is the next big political battleground that's coming up in this country.
The Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, has reference to the European Convention on Human Rights in it. What do you do? Do you just Tipp-Ex that out of the Belfast Agreement?
Yeah, I mean, that is the Blair poison pill. And it isn't just in the Good Friday Agreement, of course. It's also in the withdrawal agreement we've got with the European Union. It's also in the Scottish settlement and in the Welsh settlement. So, yeah, I mean, Tony Blair's lasting legacy is there. Yes, I'm not pretending this is easy. There's a lot of work to do to get this right. But I just feel that court has gone so far away from its original founding purpose. And I think Brexiteers, whatever the do's and don'ts of what happened the other evening, it is clear to Brexit voters that this is not what they voted for 6 years ago.
What has been the best thing about Brexit so far, then?
Oh, Britain's standing in the world, which is entirely different to what it was before.
Give us an example.
Oh, I think the AUKUS deal was a very good example.
Right.
Just
remind our listeners.
Which is where we go to Australia. Australia had a long-term submarine deal with the French for completely outdated diesel technology. As EU members, we wouldn't have been allowed to get in the way of that. But we've come together with the Americans, and we're now going to provide nuclear submarines for the Australians. And that matters because a diesel sub has to surface once every 24 hours. A nuclear sub can stay submerged for 6 months at a time. So in terms of counter Chinese Communist Party intelligence, that's a big plus. That was one example.
I'm just wondering, though, how when you say we wouldn't have been able to replace the French as their suppliers if we'd been in the EU, how would that have, what would have stopped us?
Well, the point about the EU foreign policy that we were signed up to was that we had to act in a spirit of mutual cooperation. So cutting out the French would absolutely not...
Well, no, but it was the Australians deciding to have a different contractual relationship. So and Australia's not in the EU, so they could do whatever they wanted. Australia could do what they wanted.
Well, and maybe America could have done that deal. We couldn't have done that deal without being in direct breach of our promises. Ukraine is perhaps a more contemporary and even stronger example. And I think it's pretty clear to everybody. And again, you can agree with what we're doing or disagree with what we're doing, but Boris Johnson has very much taken the lead on this, the lead way ahead of the rest of the European Union.
Well, they've come up with pretty strict sanctions. They've binned that pipeline. The Germans binned that, didn't they?
They're still paying $1 billion euros a day to Putin, so I wouldn't be too convinced about how strict on sanctions they've been. So, yeah, I think in terms of our standing in the world, we're in a different place because of Brexit, and that I do think is a good thing. I think the vaccine rollout was a very good example, again, of us acting quickly as EU members.
But he could have done exactly the same if we'd been in
the EU. But
he
wouldn't have done. He wouldn't have done.
How do you know that?
Because there was a procurement policy in place through the European Commission, and at the time we broke out on our own, all the other EU countries were still honouring it. Now, you can argue, of course.
The UK could have gone on its own,
even
as an EU member.
No, you can argue, Victoria, that we should be members of clubs and break all their rules. That's just not. It's not how we do things.
I wasn't suggesting that. I was just saying you can. We know that the vaccine progress could have been made as a member of the EU. It's just a fact.
It would have been a breach of our obligations, and it's not what we do. We don't behave like that.
Apart from the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol and...
Well, this was the deal, of course, that was sold to the great British public in December 2019, and I was very sceptical about it at the time. And yeah, there are one or two, how can I put it, dishonesties that are coming home to roost for the Prime Minister.
Go on, what do you mean by that?
Oh, look, I think in terms of Northern Ireland, it was pretty clear to all of us that actually read that document and were there that night in October in Brussels when he came out with the oven-ready deal. It was pretty clear that what he said to Northern Ireland just wasn't true.
Do you think he knew that? Or he hadn't read it properly?
It's a tough question to answer because you're asking me had Boris Johnson actually read the document and does he do detail? I think he must have known it wasn't true.
Just to rewind back to some of the things you said at the start that we're going to unpack, although we're running out of time to unpack them all now. You talked about the small boats crossing the channel. What is the Farage solution to that?
It's the Australian solution. You know, they faced exactly the same as this back in 2010, 11 and 12. They started off by taking people to an island called Nauru, where processing took place. But in the end, they even gave up with that. They just towed the boats back to Indonesia. And the UN, the EU, and the world said it was appalling what Australia had done. But it was interesting because what happened was the boats stopped coming and the drowning stopped as well. And that's the kind of action we're going to have to take.
So actually the British Navy kind of lassoing the dinghies and towing them into French waters?
I don't think towing inflatables would be a very good idea, but I think taking people on board and taking them back to French ports is what we have to do. And if you do that for 2 or 3 weeks, it will stop.
But doesn't France have to say, yeah, come ashore for that to work?
The Indonesians never said yes.
Oh, really? So you could just sort of deposit these people back, sort of like reverse people trafficking?
It's what we're going to have to do. It's what we're going to have to do. We could go for the offshore processing, and that, of course, is what Priti Patel was trying to do. And to be fair, that policy would have been a big disincentive. But we have to do something. And at the moment, we're completely tied.
Can I ask which... I'm just slightly changing the subject.
Please do.
Right?
Well, no, that's the way the programme works.
Yeah.
All over the place, some people might say.
You told us what the best things have been about Brexit so far, although you've expressed your frustration. Which laws have you been most pleased to ditch since the UK left the EU?
I didn't know we ditched any. I mean, that's the point. I didn't know we ditched any. Now, whenever I ask this question, it's the pandemic, Nigel. We've been too busy with the pandemic, but I just don't buy that. Do you know my biggest worry with all of this? I remember a week after the referendum, when Theresa May became Prime Minister, thinking, we've really worked hard here to cause a political revolution. And now the people in charge are the same people we've been fighting for over 20 years.
But now you've got Boris Johnson. And what's your message to him?
I just want to really know that he and his colleagues actually believed in this and didn't just use it purely for political opportunism. And the fact that so few of the potential benefits have been gripped makes me wonder whether they ever had the vision.
Do you regret helping him become Prime Minister? Because you did by the Brexit Party standing aside in lots of Conservatives.
I know, and it's a question, Adam, I get emailed about every single day by people. Do you know, at that moment in time, the Lib Dems were on a roll. They'd done incredibly well in the European elections. They're amazing, the Lib Dems, aren't they? They can be absolutely on the floor and somehow they bounce and... Who knows? Maybe they
may be bouncing tonight as we speak.
Well, if you believe in the bookmakers' odds, that's what's going to happen. They were on a roll, and I really thought that from the Esher constituency of Dominic Raab's seat, right the way down to Land's End, that the Lib Dems could pick up 40 seats, 50 seats. I thought we could finish up with a hung parliament or no majority for the Conservative parliament and a second referendum. And I based my decision on, even though I'm not happy with the Johnson deal, I have tried to push him as far as I possibly could, and I did, right up to the close of nominations. No, it was the right decision. It was. I've been fighting against the establishment forever. It was time to realise a win, even though it wasn't perfect.
Why did you send a dossier to Donald Trump about Piers Morgan to try and scupper Mr. Morgan's...
Have you sent a dossier about us to other podcasts?
No, I haven't. I promise. No, because your podcast is so good, I wouldn't dream of doing it. Well, I was in Mar-a-Lago, and I was chatting with the Donald, and we talked about GB News, we talked about the fact that Talk TV was about to begin, and he said, Piers rings my office 3 times a week for this interview. And he said, he's been a friend of mine for years. I said, well, he may not be quite as good a friend as you think.
Right.
What do you mean? I said, well, if you actually see what he's been writing and saying about you for the last couple of years, he may not be that straightforward with you as a friend. And that's where it came from.
How is the Donald feeling, as you called him? I should call him Donald Trump.
Oh,
about running again, and
he's looking great. He's looking great. He's playing golf pretty much every day. I would think he's lost at least 20 pounds since he was in office. He looks really well. He's in rare humour. You can see the burden of presidential responsibilities off his shoulders. He's enjoying life. I guess he's enjoying Biden's performance to a certain extent as well. I'm in no doubt that he intends to run again. I'm in no doubt at all.
What would the slogan be this time round? Go back to keeping America great again, or something like that?
Make America greater. I don't know.
No, because he would think it's gone backwards in the preceding 4 years, so it would have to be a sort of, yeah.
Well, it might be something like, remake America or rebuild
Take America back.
But none of this changes. When Reagan ran back in 1980, it was Make America Great. This stuff all goes round in circles.
Just in terms of the news that will be unfolding as people are listening to this, the results of the 2 by-elections in Wakefield and Tiverton and Honiton, is Boris Johnson finished if he loses both of those?
The problem they've got, in 97, it was the end of 18 years. They were looking very tired. It was always going to be tough to replace Thatcher anyway. And Blair was this incredible charismatic leader, brilliant oratory, phenomenal skills. Things can only get better. The marketing, the PR. It's not like that this time. This time it's different. This time it's people in the Red Wall who feel this levelling up agenda has not been, which is part of the Brexit delivery. It just isn't happening. And then what you've got in the home counties and the gentler parts of England are feeling the bloke's a liar, are feeling the bloke's untrustworthy, a feeling, you wouldn't want this chap to take your daughter out. I mean, it's that
which adds up to...
Well, what it means is that they're losing votes to Labour in Wakefield and the Liberal Democrats in the south and the southwest of England. And you look at the local election results. They were down in Scotland. They were down in Wales. London, they were down, and the demographics of London are changing. And I can see them losing seats all around the country. My own view is that if they stick with Johnson, they're doomed. They're doomed. Unless he has it within him to suddenly make some massive policy shifts on these areas I talked about earlier, on VAT, on ECHR, to retake the agenda.
Right, you've got to go and present your show on GB News, which leads me to ask you, as someone who's just launched a new programme in the last year or so, which has been very successful, I'm launching a new programme on Radio 4 on Friday lunchtime. Any tips for a sort of newbie presenter?
Well, you're hardly a newbie presenter. But do you know what? What I try to do, keep it real. Remember that most people listening don't read and study this all day and all night in the way that we do because we're hooked and obsessed with current affairs and news. Just don't talk down to audiences. And the great broadcasters over the years, be they in current affairs, politics, or light entertainment, who was the best ever broadcaster? Terry Wogan. Why? Because people thought he was actually talking to them. And if broadcasters can do that, they've cracked it. So good luck.
Thank you. My show's called Antisocial with Adam Fleming, which is better than one of the other titles, which was Adam Fleming's Antisocial. Which had too many meanings to my life.
And is that why you've now got this new moustache?
What do you think of it? What do you think?
Have you ever had a moustache?
No.
Okay.
But I think briefly one summer I might have done.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Chris Mason is in the house. And when I mean the house, I mean Edinburgh.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
What are you doing there?
I am on my final jaunt for Any Questions on Radio 4 this weekend. So I'm on my way to Lerwick in the Shetland Islands and just stopping off in Edinburgh for a chat with you guys.
Oh, I meant to arrange a surprise for your last one, but I forgot. Oh, well, that's a surprise. Well, actually, no, the surprise is there's another Chris here, too. It's Chris Curtis from Opinium, the polling company. Hello.
Hiya, how you doing?
Good, thanks. Thanks for joining us. So, Chris, this is going to get tricky, isn't it? Chris Mason, as we're recording this episode of Newscast on Thursday evening, we don't have the result of the 2 by-elections yet in Tiverton and Wakefield. What will you be looking out for in the results when we get them?
Yeah, we have to sound wise, don't we? Here we are at sort of recording at 6:30, and you might be watching on BBC One at kind of midnight, or listening to us tomorrow when the result is already known. I mean, ultimately, we're looking to see, do the Conservatives lose both of the seats that they are contesting in Wakefield in West Yorkshire, Tiverton and Honiton in Devon? Why does it matter? Well, they're kind of a microcosm of the kind of pincer movement the Conservatives fear at the next election, losing seats that for yonks had been rock solid Labour, many of them in the north of England, Wakefield being one of them, and the return of the Lib Dems potentially in the southwest of England, which not that long ago was something of a powerhouse for the Lib Dems, particularly Cornwall. And if those two things happen, and the Conservatives lose both of those seats, which plenty of Conservatives think they very well might do, then there'll be plenty of Tories thinking, blimey, what could happen to me at the next election? And then that will be interesting in terms of how that shapes the kind of dynamic, the culture, the conversation amongst Conservative MPs at Westminster.
And other Chris, I hope you don't mind me calling you that, the really helpful thing about by-elections, just like kind of local elections as well, is it is a real genuine test of public opinion in the real world rather than a sort of guess about public opinion. So what will you be able to tell from these results? Or is it just simple as win or lose?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say that I think opinion polls are a pretty good test of what public opinion is as well.
From opinion polling company.
So yeah, I mean, I think we have a fairly good idea of where public opinion stands already from opinion polls. But yes, as you say, by-elections are real people walking to real polling stations and putting real crosses in real boxes. And that's also an important thing to do. I mean, when I interpret by-elections, what I do is I look at what the polling is showing the national picture is, and I look at how that's playing out on a local level. And what's interesting about these two by-elections is just how differently things are going to play out on a local level, even though, you know, what we're seeing in the national picture. So if you take Wakefield, for example, you know, I think almost everyone is expecting Labour to win Wakefield. If you don't think Labour's going to win Wakefield, you know, you should really go onto a bookmaker's website right now because you could make a lot of money. And the reason that we're fairly confident Labour's going to win in Wakefield is because what we're really expecting to play out there is just that national picture. A small but noticeable chunk of Conservative voters from the last election, you know, somewhere around 1 in 10, have switched over to the Labour Party. If that happens in Wakefield, Labour gains Wakefield. When you add into the fact that governments normally end up doing worse in by-elections than they would do otherwise, that will move the dial even further. You know, and when you consider that, you know, people are so upset with the Conservatives right now, a lot of Conservative voters might stay at home. It means that we can be fairly confident that that's the way it's going to play out. That's very different to what's happening in Tiverton and Honiton. It's worth noting just how safe a Conservative seat it is down there. I think there's only 40 Conservative seats in the country that have majorities going into this larger than the Conservative majority in Tiverton and Honiton. What if the Lib Dems manage to win tonight? And again, I think that's the most likely outcome. You know, this may end up being proven wrong a few hours' time.
Can't wait to play this back to you if it is.
But if the Lib Dems end up winning there, it is worth noting just the kind of majority they've ended up overcoming. And if they do it...
It's 24,900 or something.
24,900, the kind of majority that you don't normally overcome, even given the craziness of by-elections. And the way that they'll end up doing it is, you know, basically by there's lots of Conservative voters at the moment who are very disaffected, very upset. You know, they don't necessarily like any party particularly, but they're wanting to put in place a protest vote. So if you look at it, somewhere around 4 in 10 people who voted Conservative at the last election don't tell us pollsters that they'd vote Conservative in the general election tomorrow. They don't necessarily have a good idea of where else they'd go. Many of them tell us that they're completely undecided about what they'd do. And what the Lib Dems are hoping to do is come in at that local level and basically go to those voters who are disaffected with the Conservatives, go, well, locally, you can vote for the Liberal Democrats here, can't you? It's not going to change the government, but you get a good Liberal Democrat MP and you get to stick it to the Tory party you don't like. And we're expecting tonight that that's going to be enough for the Liberal Democrats to overcome that massive Conservative majority.
It's interesting speaking to Conservative MPs because these by-election results are sort of amongst Conservatives, they're kind of expecting to do badly. They're expecting to lose both of them. And therefore, to an extent, part of that is baked in. So their reaction to a degree is baked in. I don't think, I mean, look, if it happens for them and they lose them both, they will be glum and they will be worried. And all but, as Chris said, 40 of them will be looking at their majorities and thinking, blimey, mine's a lot smaller than the one in Devon. What could happen to me. So that will happen. But whether it actually prompts in the short term, i.e. this side of the summer, any kind of movement to think, oh, crikey, is it time for a new leader again? I would doubt, I think, at this stage. But you can never tell. You can never measure mood until you can feel it. And you can only feel it when something's happened as opposed to predicted to happen.
And Chris Curtis, I mean, there's been lots of other things happening this week. People not going to Rwanda, rail strikes. Is there a bit of polling you've done that you think just really reveals something about where the country is around one of those things, or anything else?
I mean, it sort of doesn't matter what question you ask right now, and this is part of the difficulty for the Conservatives. It kind of doesn't matter what question you ask right now, what issue you ask about. It's quite clear the answer you get back from the public is that they don't trust the government. They don't trust the Prime Minister. Normally what you have is, here's Labour's areas, here's Conservatives' areas, and it's a fight between the two. Increasingly, there aren't very many Conservative areas left that they have a lead on those kind of questions. You normally have midterm blues with governments where they end up doing badly at this stage and bringing it back before the next general election. David Cameron lost Corby. He won the general election in 2015. That's a really good example of that. But he had a strategy to do so. He used his long-term economic plan, and he saw the polling showing that the Conservative Party were ahead on the economy in order to turn that around. And the difficulty that I'm having right now is trying to work out what the Conservative Party plan is. As you say, it's probably use Rwanda and try these different wedge issues and see what sticks. Have a go at the strikers, for example. But when people are getting a lot poorer, when the economy might be about to go into a recession, I'm just not sure that focusing on these issues that are far, far down people's priority list is going to be the kind of thing that can turn this around.
So are they not getting credit for the 37 billion, which is going to help some of the lowest income families in the country?
They don't seem to have got much credit
right,
yet.
That's interesting.
And there's a few.
But I wonder when the money starts arriving.
Yeah.
They will.
Yeah.
It'll be delayed.
Yeah, maybe so. But I think the issue is they're putting a lot of money into this, but it's still not going to be enough for lots of people. But also, it basically just means the most important issue to voters is one where they sort of instinctively don't trust the Conservative Party to have their back. As opposed to, if the last general election was fought on Brexit, that was an issue where more people trusted the Conservatives to get it done. The next 12 months is going to be focused on the cost of living, energy prices, putting more money in pockets. And most people tend to think that the Labour Party is more on their side in that area. And fundamentally, that's the issue that the Conservatives have.
Chris, thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Victoria, it's been lovely having you in the Newscast studio, because I know you've been spending most of your time in the Ukraine cast studio. So many stories in that podcast. Is there one that is just kind of like lodged in the front of your brain?
There really is. There's a woman we spoke to called Victoria who is a mum, and she was trying to flee with her husband and a 12-year-old daughter, Veronica, and her 1-year-old daughter, Valvara. And her husband and 12-year-old were killed in front of her as a shell hit their car. And she had to survive to look after her 1-year-old. She was abducted by Russian soldiers. She was taken to a basement where there were lots of other Ukrainians. They were held there for 3 weeks. She begged the Russian soldiers, please, can you bring me the bodies of my daughter and my husband because I want to bury them? And she persuaded them to do that. And so she did manage to give them a respectful burial. And she has been waiting to come to the UK for 56 days. That's how long she has been waiting for a visa. And yeah, and it's a searing experience, and we are following her story on Ukrainecast.
Just another example of the amazing connections that you're forging with people who've been going through all of this.
Yeah.
Thanks again for being on with us tonight. That's it for this episode of Newscast. We'll be back with another one very soon. Bye.
Bye.
Newscast from the BBC.